Hello and welcome to the fourth and final live stream of this year's Dynamic Range Day 2026. In this stream, I don't have anybody else with me right away, at least. So if you guys could help me by just letting me know in the chat that you can see and hear me, okay, that would be really reassuring for me. Should be working. I can check my audio meters here, hopefully, and see that things are moving. But yes, it's always nice to know. And let me know where you're watching from this evening, or whether you've seen any of the other streams today. Be great to hear from you. Oh, Helena is here. Helena is nominated for this year's award, or her album Evolve is. I apologise, Wunsch Machine. I can never remember what your real name is. It was there for a minute, and then it went. I do know your real name. I just can never connect it with the username. Kev, great to see you. Brian is here. Thank you. You can see and hear me. That's great to know. So yes, welcome. Let me find my notes. There have been. So this is the fourth stream. The first one was just a quick introduction, so no need to watch that. But if you want to see the replays, you can go to dynamicrangeday.co.uk/live, and all of the replays will be available for you there. In this evening's stream, I'm going to get this introduction out of the way. Then I'm going to talk to you about why I've given up on Dynamics. Not really, but it's quite a good headline, I think. What I think the state of things is today and why I think it's an opportunity. And I also want to share with you one of my favorite recent examples of Dynamics and how you can hear it yourself, which is not by listening to the CD release, unfortunately. I'm going to tell you the shortlist for the award and just talk about why each of the albums is in there, why I chose them this year. I want to play you some examples. I've got 4 examples from the playlist, from the shortlist, I should say, to play you, so that you can hear the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Then I'm going to talk about the winner of the award this year. And then finally, at the end, there will be our traditional Q&A where you guys can ask me pretty much anything about mastering, loudness, dynamics, whatever you would like. So I wanted to tell you about the 2 streams earlier on, because I really recommend you check those out as well. In the first stream today, or the second stream, but the first main stream, I talked to Justin Gray, who he's a mastering engineer, he's a musician, he's a producer, and his album Immersed is nominated for the Dynamic Range Day Award this year. It's a fantastic album. I'm going to be talking about that more in a bit, but Justin is such a helpful, interesting guy. He seemed like the ideal person to talk about. I mean, I knew that he had conceived this album with dynamics in mind from the outset, so I really wanted to take the opportunity to talk to him. So it was pretty early for you guys, especially if you're on the East Coast, West Coast of the US. So I apologize if you missed that. That was he was teaching today, so that was the time slot that he had available. But yeah, I highly recommend heading over and checking out the replay of that if you haven't seen it already. And then later in the day, I spoke to Ian Stewart from Flowtown Mastering. Lots of you will know Ian. He's been on my podcast. He's been on one of these broadcasts before. He's a mastering engineer, runs Flowtown Mastering in the US. He also writes for Isotope, teaches at Berklee College of Music, and helped develop in fact, he had the idea for the Basslane Pro plugin whilst talking to me on my podcast, and went ahead and made it happen with Tone Projects, which is very cool. So it's always a pleasure to talk to Ian, and he and I kind of dug into in more detail what we think the state of play with dynamics and loudness is in 2026, how we feel about it, the reaction that he gets from his students when he's talking to them about loudness and dynamics. Really great conversation. I also want to take the opportunity just before we get started to let you know that in celebration of Dynamic Range Day, there are 2 special offers available to you guys now. The first one is for my Dynameter 2 plugin. That's the version 2 of the original Dynameter. We added a bunch of new modes so you can visualize the stereo mode. There's a multiband mode so you can see how the dynamics are distributed across the EQ spectrum of your music. Mid-side mode, it's fully resizable. There's a new histogram feature, so you can see the overall dynamics of a song at a glance, just see like exactly how much of it is super loud or super dynamic or whatever that might be. So that's available for 30% off this week. If you head over to meterplugs.com/dynameter or meterplugs.com and click that link, you can get that offer now. And also 2 of my courses, Home Mastering EQ and Home Mastering Compression, are both 40% off this week to celebrate Dynamic Range Day. You just need to use the code DRD26 in the cart if you want to check those out. And you can find those at homemastering.com/HMEQ for Home Mastering EQ, or HMC for Home Mastering Compression. I will drop those into the comments later on. If all of those links I can put in the comments for you guys later on if you missed those links. So I think that is the housekeeping coming out. Looking at the comments, we've got Dean Martin Hovey, who is the mastering engineer for the album Luminal, which is also nominated for the award. Brian Eno and BT Wolf. I love that album. I'm going to play a bit of music from that in a little while because I love it so much. There were 3 or 4 albums that 3 albums definitely that Brian did with BT. I love all of them, but Luminal is my favorite. I can see Brian Murphy is here. Fantastic. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate your support, or your interest at least. So, as promised, why have I given up on Dynamics? I haven't given up on Dynamics at all. Why have I given up on Dynamic Range Day? I haven't given up on Dynamic Range Day at all, except when I started out, the concept of the loudness war frustrated me so much. Still frustrates me, but it frustrated me so much that I started the event. If any of you were there in the early days, I know some of you were back in 2010, the original idea was to type in all caps all day on social media so that you were shouting, which is kind of supposed to be an analogy for music that is loud all the time. That was super annoying, so we left that idea behind. But I really wanted to make people aware of the issue, and I wanted to persuade them to do something different. And that, I think, is what I've given up on. I still want to make people aware of this. I think most people are aware of the loudness wars at this point. A combination of this event and just coverage in the popular press and in online and different articles and newsletters and stuff. I think, and I've said this on my podcast recently, I see the comments often that the loudness wars are over and that loud won. I understand where that sentiment comes from, because the majority of mainstream releases are super, super loud, or super, super high LUFS, I should say. But I don't accept that means that loud won. Loud is the most common way that stuff is delivered. High LUFS is the norm. I'm not convinced that wins. And I'm going to show you an example in a minute of a perfect example of where I don't think high loudness wins at all. However, I kind of feel like at this point it's not my job or anybody's job to persuade anybody. If there are people out there who want to make super, super loud music or have their music mastered super, super loud, that's up to them, of course. It's their choice. And I feel like it's their missed opportunity, to be honest. My experience of mastering with what I call balanced dynamics. So I'm aiming for the sweet spot. What I think is the perfect balance between loudness and dynamics is that my masters win. We've talked about this often before. I'm not going to repeat it in a ton of detail now, but online, the vast majority of people will hear that all the super, super loud stuff will be turned down. In definitely more than 80% of people are hearing it that way. I can't figure out or calculate exactly how much more, but that's just based on the fact that 80% of people are listening on YouTube video platform where all the loud stuff is turned down and you can't turn it off. You can turn it off in Spotify and Apple Music and Tidal and other places, but it's on by default and most people don't turn it off. So, you know, all of us, the ones who care most about music, are listening to it with normalization disabled so that we can hear the real sound. But over 80%, possibly as much as getting towards 90%, I would say, of people out there listening don't listen that way. So it's a bit like maybe judging our music based on what it would sound like on vinyl when the vast majority of people are listening to streaming or CD. Or, you know, back in the days when vinyl was the majority, to be listening to it, how does it sound on digital compact cassette, which was a tiny minority format, you know? It's, to me, it's less important what the actual mastered loudness is. It's how do people hear it? And the answer is, with the super loud stuff, turned down. So that will, I'll kind of show you an example of that in a minute and why I say that that's important. So what that means is, for me, the music that's more dynamic wins. When you hear it with the loud stuff turned down to a similar level, the dynamics win. I'm going to show you an example of that. I'm sure you've heard me give examples of this before, but I've got another one to show you today, the one that I really like. I like it musically, and I just think it really clearly demonstrates exactly what I'm talking about. In fact, maybe I'll show you that example now and then come back to what do we do about this, you know, and what is the current situation. So let me share my screen. Wunsch Machine says, I guess I'm the only one not nominated for anything. The only one who's commenting in the chat, maybe. No, I think, no, there's a bunch of them. Let's, incidentally, hopefully everybody can see, I'm seeing comments coming through from YouTube. I know there's a bunch of people watching on Facebook as well, and vice versa. Hopefully everybody can see everything and be able to. Kev is saying, big shout out, please, if you haven't, after this finishes, watch the last video Ian uploaded where he mastered the same song from 2 mixes which were years apart. It's a real gem. Thank you, Kev. Appreciate that. Yeah, I really like that that video, and I think it's another, neither of those masters or mixes are mastered with extreme loudness, but I think you can definitely hear a difference in the dynamics that is beneficial and interesting, I think. Anyway, so let's share my screen. I can start off by just sharing. So this is my loudness penalty studio application. Let me make sure, yeah, you guys can see that. It's my application. I'm using it because it just demonstrates this stuff really, really clearly. So we've got a bunch of things here. Over on the right-hand side here, you can see the examples from the shortlist for the award that I'm going to play you in a little while. I've got Bruno Mars, Justin Gray, Sword 2, and an Eno and Wolf example. But over here, we've got 4 tracks. These are these ones here that are from the new Gorillaz album, The Mountain. It's a fantastic album. I love it musically. And what you can see is, so I've got 2 versions of the track Dream Machine. So each, in case you haven't seen this application before, each block here is a song or a track. The top of the block is the maximum peak level. The pink line is the integrated, which is the overall loudness level, which is the one that's used by streaming services to decide whether to turn things up or down or not. The white area is the loudness range. So you can see the top of the loudness range, which corresponds to the loudest moments in the song, and the bottom of the loudest range, which corresponds to the quietest moments in the song. And then the blue line shows the short-term loudness, so you can see how the loudness of each song evolves through the track. And you can see we've got a big, well, the songs that I've chosen from the shortlist for the Dynamic Range Day Award are more similar in level. What do we got? Bruno Mars is at -10, basically. Justin Gray, The River's Edge, is at -14. The Sword 2 track here, Disconnection, is at -11, and the Eno and Wolf track is -12. These 4, we can see there's much bigger differences, and that's because I've got 2 versions of Dream Machine from the Mountain, and I've got 2 versions of Manifesto. These ones, the loud ones, are the stereo mixes from the album. These ones here are stereo down mixes of the Dolby Atmos versions. So you guys probably know Dolby Atmos has a requirement that the loudest song shouldn't be any higher than -18 LUFS. So there's no pressure on mixing and mastering engineers to go any louder than they want to. And what that means is that typically lots of tracks are much more dynamic. If I enable loudness matching, let me put it on lowest LUFS so they all match perfectly. You can see all the loud stuff gets turned down. Let's just rescale this slightly so you can see. There we go. But now you can see, you know, the graphs of short-term loudness between these. I mean, you can see they're slightly different, but they're not dramatically different. But what is dramatically different is the amount of peak headroom. You can see that on Dream Machine, the peak headroom has been reduced by, let's compare the PLR, about 6 dB. So 6 dB less peak headroom on that file there, and something similar here. So the Atmos versions have been mastered. I mean, they weren't originally peaking at 0. We can see the original peak levels listed here. So the stereo ones are peaking at 0 and up at +1, but the Atmos versions are still peaking at -5. So they don't need they don't need to be at -18 to be dynamic enough that the mixer would be happy with them. But they are dramatically more dynamic because they've got so much more peak to loudness range in them. You might be asking, how did I get these and what are they? Let me quickly show you that. In fact, I will briefly stop sharing and move across to Apple Music so that you can see what I'm going to do there. In fact, I'll do entire screen just to make sure that you guys don't miss out on anything. There we go. So, I mean, the Atmos versions are available in a bunch of different applications at this point. There's the album in Apple Music. Apple Music I'm using because I'm an Apple ecosystem person. If I hit play on this, you might be deafened, so I'm not going to do that. But basically, you would see the track playing back. In fact, I guess I could reduce the level to 0 and just do that. If I play one of these songs, and there, that little symbol there, I don't know how well you can see that on the screen, but up there where my mouse is, that tells me that I'm hearing lossless audio. Oh, there you go, lossless 2448, which is one option. So that's going to be the stereo mix. But if I come up here to Apple Music and go to preferences, I mean, the general preferences here, if I go to playback, down here there's a Dolby Atmos setting, and that is set by default to automatic. What that means is if you have a soundbar, or if you have a laptop that has Dolby Atmos playback enabled, or if you have a pair of Apple earbuds or AirPods Pro headphones, something that is capable of head tracking, basically, in the Apple ecosystem, then it will play you the Dolby Atmos version. But I don't, I'm just listening on speakers and normal headphones, so that is currently playing me the lossless version. However, I can change that to, you can select off, which will never play you Dolby Atmos. I'm going to choose always on, and it comes up with a warning saying this isn't supported on all speakers. So it's telling you that it's going to play Atmos all the time, and that may not be ideal for your playback configuration. I'm going to say fine, go for it. So now we've got Dolby Atmos, and if I come back here and just play a different song just to trigger, now you can see we've got the Dolby logo there, and if I click on it, Dolby Atmos. Now that is now using the Dolby Atmos file that's on Apple, which is playing back, but the Mac still knows that we don't have a soundbar or multiple speakers or headphones connected that are capable of doing the binaural version. So it just plays us a stereo mix, and depending on the mix, that can be extremely close to the stereo mix that was there before, except that it has all those extra dynamics. Let me swap back to make that point for you again. If we go back to Loudness Penalty Studio, now you can see that's where the extra dynamics in these Atmos versions come from. So as I say, the mixes are very, very similar apart from the dynamics. They don't have any of the binaural processing that can kind of sometimes muddy the water when you're comparing. So if you are interested in hearing what your favorite releases sound like with more dynamics, check the platform you're listening on to see if it supports Dolby Atmos. And if it does, switch the settings across like this, and you will get a more dynamic version, which you may or may not like. If you're watching the Dynamic Range Day broadcast, I'm assuming you will like it. So let me play you some examples. Let's play a little bit of Dream Machine. And what I'm going to do is I will just move, you'll see me moving the mouse backwards and forwards between the Atmos version and the stereo version. They are more or less synced up. It's not perfect, but it's close enough for you to hear the difference. I'll play one of the loudest sections because that's where you'll hear most of the dynamic processing in the Dolby Atmos, in the stereo masters. Let's take a listen. I don't know how well that will come across on the stream or how sensitive you are to the differences. I mean, the first thing to say is it's not a disaster. The Stereo Master is, despite the fact that it's got whatever that is, 6 dB less peak to loudness ratio, it's not horribly distorted. It's not, it doesn't sound terrible by any means. The big thing that I notice is the bass. It almost feels like there's an extra octave of bass on the Atmos version. I mean, I will say sometimes when you listen to Atmos versions, there is too much bass. Could be because of issues with how they've used the subwoofer, the LFE channel. It could be a taste thing. There's lots of things that can go slightly awry in Atmos, just as there are in stereo. In this case, I feel all that extra bass goodness I just really like. That's what I want from my dynamics. And as I've said often, low end is one of the first things that has to go when you want to lift up the LUFS without causing distortion and other problems, because lots and lots of bass slamming into a limiter or into clipping or into heavy compression, it'll cause pumping or it'll cause distortion. So that's a perfectly sensible decision. The stereo version was mastered by Heber Kadri, and who, interestingly enough, also mastered the Sword 2 album that is on the Dynamic Range Day shortlist this year, so that I'm going to play you an example of in a little while. So this is by no means to make any kind of critical comment in that sense. Heber has made several masters in the last year or so that have been very dynamic by modern standards. So that's fantastic to see her having, I assume, I don't know this for sure, but having those conversations with her clients and making those choices. In this case, someone somewhere wanted the Stereo Master to be considerably louder. She's done a great job of achieving that, but you just lose out on all that lovely low end. Let me play that to you again. You can listen to the bass in particular. I mean, it's the same comment really for Manifesto, the second track that I've got here as an example. I'll just play some of that as well so you can hear how that works. In some ways, I find this was the one that every time I listen to the album in this stereo mix down of the Atmos version, I just enjoy how the low end sounds. I mean, you can also hear it in the snare, the difference in dynamics. It's kind of subtle but not subtle in that strange way. Yeah, let me play you that example.
No one can convince the invincible to be sensible. Bits in the principle, my pistol won't miss you all. Why shouldn't I diss you, dog? I'm Leatherface. This E&J made me say your DNA's genetic waste. A medic case that'll detonate. A pathetic taste that shroom head that murder fairies. A recovering heroin addict looking down the barrel of my parents' attic. Got this shotgun just swearing at it. My triggers have turned a pump into a Uzi, you chumps. Do that movement, y'all jump. Leatherface. This E&J made me say your DNA's genetic waste. A medic case that'll detonate. Dirty Harry. A pathetic taste that shroom head that murder fairies. A recovering heroin addict looking down the barrel of my parents' attic. Got this shotgun just swearing.
For me, it's just such a great example. You know, like I say, the Stereo Master doesn't sound bad. It just sounds held in. It sounds restrained. It doesn't have the same swagger. It doesn't have the same heft as the Atmos downmix to stereo. So yeah, there you go. I think that's a really good example. Hopefully you guys can hear that. Let me stop sharing my screen. I'll come back and just check out what you're saying in the if some of you might not be hearing the audio because of copyright protection. Some people are saying they can't hear a difference. That's interesting. Depends on what you're listening on. Depends how much low end. If you're listening on something that doesn't have that much low end, you're not going to hear the difference, notice the difference in that low end in the same way. Interesting, different clarity in the bass for the Atmos versions. People discussing how to get, Kev hears it in the main vocal. Someone's asking whether you don't want stable volume on in YouTube. If you're not hearing a difference, that could be messing things up. It's interesting. I don't know whether that applies to live videos. Maybe it does. So yeah, I probably should have mentioned that. If you're not hearing it, you can go back and check again on the replay, or you can do this test for yourself as I showed you. But you know, it all depends what you're tuned into, what your taste is. And there's several other videos where I go into this on my stream, on my YouTube channel, if you want to take a look, if you haven't heard these kind of examples before. In fact, I did one just recently that used some songs from the UK top 20, including Golden from K-pop Demon Hunters, which I kind of regretted using because I then had it stuck in my head for weeks. But that's, yeah, see how you go. So where does all of this leave us? You know, like I say, I'm kind of not trying to persuade people anymore. But I'm offering it to you guys as an opportunity. You know, if you like the differences that were there in those files, when you hear the differences, anybody can make use of those differences and dynamics. It doesn't mean you have to do a master at -18, right? Which is where those Dolby Atmos versions were, because they had 5 dB peak headroom. So that would put them at -13. And you could go a dB or two louder. I mean, the other examples that I've got, there are very few that are actually that dynamic or mastered at that low of an LUFS. But if you like those differences and you want to have those advantages for your music, you absolutely can. And whatever it is, 85, 90% of people, that's how they're going to hear them. And my experience mastering over the years has been the masters that I do in this way really jump out of playlists, of, you know, when you hear things played in shuffle. So I genuinely think it's a real opportunity that can be taken advantage of. And I was talking to, I won't go into this in too much detail because I talked with Ian Stewart earlier in the day on the earlier stream, but I think both of us agreed. I mean, I had a comment on one of the early videos saying, it's been 16 years that you've been running this event. Has there been any change? I think there has been a change. I think things maxed out way back in the early 2010s. I think then since then things have eased back. I think there is more variety these days in releases. I think there is, I think there's still some super loud stuff out there that probably doesn't need to be. But I think more people are taking advantage. And I think one of the other things I was saying with Ian just briefly is that there's a few names that didn't make the shortlist this year, but almost did. For example, Taylor Swift and Billie Eilish, right? Arguably two of the biggest artists in the world. And if their albums had been just a dB or two lower at the loudest moments, not overall, but just the very loud sections, you know, I wanted to put them on the list because they're such big artists and they're so successful. And I wanted to hold them up as an example of here is how dynamics can really be successful. But I want to also be pragmatic and be credible. You know, I'm not, and if there are a couple of songs on those albums that are really, really loud and pushing it beyond what I think is the sweet spot, then that opens me up to people going, well, I'm not so sure. There are still some fairly loud albums and tracks. There are loud songs on some of the albums on this year's shortlist. But so yeah, if two of the biggest artists in the world are just a dB or two too loud, could they not be a dB or two quieter and have a little bit more dynamics and sound even better, and nobody will care because music fans are not worried about all this stuff. They just enjoy the music. And it's going to sound better to them. So that's why I say, you know, I'm going to keep doing dynamic range day. I'm going to keep talking about dynamics, not because I'm trying to persuade anybody. If you're doing loud masters and you're happy with it, that's all good. But I know there are a bunch of people out there who are frustrated by the fact they feel they need to go super loud and they don't like what it does to the music. And I want to say to them, this is safe. This is absolutely a realistic option. This is not going to have a significant downside for you or the success of the music. So that was my favorite example, recent example of dynamics is that Atmos version of the Gorillaz album. Let's go through the other names on the shortlist this year briefly and just talk about why they're there, what I liked about them, and I'll play you some examples. So let me get my list up. So Bruno Mars, The Romantic. I posted this shortlist a couple of weeks ago, and I got a comment on one of the posts saying somebody listened to it. It sounded like an album from the 70s. They meant that in a positive way. It's a classic, I would say, style. You know, it's not ultra aggressive. But it is really enjoyably dynamic by today's standards. And this was I mentioned this last year because this is an old release. It was only a single song, and I'm looking for albums for the award. But the single that Bruno Mars did with Lady Gaga, Die With A Smile, has an integrated loudness of -11 LUFS, not -6 or -8 or what everybody tells you things have to be in order to be successful. At this point, it's got 1.5 billion streams. It's constantly in the charts. It's been in the charts since before the last dynamic range day, so over a year ago. That's an example of how successful something can be with great dynamics. You know, the argument to me, you need high LUFS for success, just doesn't add up. It's not supported by the evidence. Next up, we have Immersed by Justin Gray. This is I guess a fusion world album. It's a beautiful sounding album. I really enjoy it musically as well. As I say, there's a whole 45-minute conversation with Justin on the earlier live stream. Please check that out. Please check this album out. I think it's a fantastic sounding album. I'm going to play you an example from that in a minute. Helena Rice's album Evolve. Helena is with us on in the chat this evening. I met Helena at an event that Tim Exile organised at his Timbers studio in London recently at the launch. I was not aware of her, but I met a bunch of people that evening and immediately went off and found out all about them. Helena is making, maybe she can tell us in the chat if I'm wrong about this. To me, it's, I would say, intelligent techno, creative techno. It is one of the louder ones on the list, I will say. There are a couple of songs on it that really push up. But overall, it measured minus 10.6 LUFS. And by modern standards in that genre, it's pretty dynamic. Sounds great. I really enjoyed it. I think you guys should check it out as well. U2, Days of Ash. This is an EP. There's only 3 or 4 songs, I think, on it. But again, minus 10.3 LUFS overall, but from a band of the caliber and sales margin of U2, I think that's an example worth celebrating. Flight, Between You and Me, that's a much more mellow, enjoyable album. Again, that's mastered by Matt Colton at Metropolis. I love the way that sounds. Matt won the Dynamic Range Day Award for a James Blake album several years ago now. He has also done a lot of very loud masters because of, I understand there is a ton of pressure on engineers like him and Heber. Almost all, I'm lucky. I don't get this level of pressure because I'm constantly talking about dynamics. So people who want super loud albums don't come to me. But it is a reality of the current situation. And it's one of the things that's such a shame about the current situation is that people feel under pressure to do something that most of the music fans don't care about and won't hear. Sword 2, I've already talked about. Electric Hour. So Flight was minus 12.6. So is, funnily enough, Electric Hour. I'm going to play you an example of that in a minute. I guess it's maybe kind of 90s indie rock kind of flavor. It's a great aggressive sound with great dynamics, mastered by Heber, who mastered the Gorillaz album as well. Enter the Gamma Live by Gesaffelstein, mastered by William Duvet. He won the Dynamic Range Day Award for the live video of, I'm going to blank on the artist's name. If you go to the Dynamic Range Day Award page, scroll down, you will see it there. He also did the live sound for Justice. Justice's album is fantastically dynamic, amazing sounding album, and they completely took advantage of those dynamics in the live situation. Gesaffelstein does the same thing. These artists go to William and his company because they specialize in this stuff. And I love this example because there are so many people out there saying, for live PAs and for clubs, you have to be super, super loud. I believe I'm right in saying that their live rigs are calibrated. They're mixing at minus 23 LUFS, but the playback is calibrated so that they can take advantage of all of those dynamics and get this amazing emotional impact in the arena, which I just love that entire concept, obviously. 41, that's the, I had a typo in my, I've pasted it in the wrong place. 41 Longfield Street, late 80s by Kieran Hebden and William Tyler. This is just a gorgeous album. It's not loud, it's not aggressive, it's mellow, it's chilled, and it has great dynamics. It sounds fantastic. I just recommend everybody check that out. I just love it musically. What does that measure? Minus 13.8 overall. So, plenty of dynamic variety in there. Schmerz, Big City Life. I guess it's kind of electro pop. I think they're from the Netherlands. Minus 10.8 again, so on the loud side, but just lots of variety. Really enjoyed listening to it. Slightly retro feel to the sound of it. Also recommended. You guys should check that out. And then finally on the list, we've got the Brian Eno and BT Wolf album Luminal. Overall, minus 13.4. I mean, again, it's not a loud album. It's not, I'm looking with the award for examples that show that, yes, mellow stuff sounds great with great dynamics, but so can super loud stuff or really aggressive stuff. I mean, the aggression and the power of the Gesaffelstein, it's pummeling at some points. Those dynamics are used to hit you with the rhythm, with the power of the drums in particular. So that's a great example of, high LUFS don't necessarily translate to power and aggression. Actually, dynamics can translate to power and aggression. So enough talk. Let me reshare my screen and play you a few examples of these. Let me find the right window. There's lots of activity in the chat here. I will come back and talk to you guys. Somebody says I need that t-shirt. Yeah, I need to make these available maybe. Somebody remind me to look into that. So let me just check that you can see that. Yes, that looks good. So I'll play you a little bit of some examples from here. So we'll start with the Bruno Mars track.
You better show me now, show me now, show me now. 'Cause when I take it to the floor, ooh, you gotta get down. You know what to do. Hey, Mr. DJ, play a song of this pretty little lady. 'Cause if she dances good as she look right now.
I can get this a little bit louder for you guys, just so that you can, because I was matching the LUFS there, and that's taken everything down to -19 LUFS. That's another suggestion for the people who may be finding those differences in the early example tricky to pick out. Just increase the level a little bit more. As I say, in order to match all of these equally, we have to go for the level of the quietest song, so it takes them all the way down. In this case, I think I can get a match by using the Apple Music calibration. That works. So yeah, let's have a... I mean, you can hear, how great is that, Bruno Mars? That's actually one of the louder tracks on the album. Original loudness, I think, -10 LUFS. But just, you know, great feel to that.
Mr. DJ, play some of this pretty little lady. 'Cause if she dances good as she look right now, I just might make her my baby.
To the track from Immersed by Justin Gray. This is The River's Edge. I'll play one of the louder sections. Warm, it's open, it's clear, there's beautiful transients on all that percussion. Oh, it's just lush, I think is a word. Incidentally, I'm playing all of these obviously with matched loudness. I was just trying to think, if I switch this to album mode, yeah, that's going to take them all way down. So I think that's the best way to do it without blasting you guys. Obviously, actually, if I disable loudness matching, you can see that the Bruno Mars track is quite a lot louder than the Justin Gray album. But I mean, not, you know, the loudest moments of River's Edge are up there at whatever that is, -9, -10 LUFS, which is pretty much where the Bruno Mars is sitting throughout. And the loudest moments of the others are on a par. The Eno and Wolf track is, it's a more mellow tune, so it's not as loud. Given that this is the Dynamic Range Day broadcast, I don't want to blast all of you, so this is just so you can hear the music. Well, let me know in the Q&A at the end. Maybe I could come back to this and play it to you with the not matching disabled, if you're interested to hear the overall. I mean, take it from me, they sit pretty well musically next to each other. You know, the Bruno Mars one is one of the most upbeat, upfront tracks. It's one of the louder ones. The River's Edge is more mellow until that loud section at the end. Let me play you a little bit of the Disconnection, the Sword 2 track. just such a refreshing change to hear material like this not pushed. You know, so many of these songs would just be pushed much harder normally for no particular musical reason, and it's just, yeah, just so enjoyable. Let me play a little bit of the Brian Eno and BT Wolf track. I love this album. Everybody has. I've listened to this album more, I think, than anything else over the last year, ever since it was released. It's just amazing.
Suddenly, life is so sweet again. Moments of tenderness blending in, 'cause we're beating off the ceiling, and I love it every moment. We're moving in circles again, awaking the feeling within, shaking the water again, with nothing to stop us ahead. Suddenly, I can.
So there you go. Like I say, it's not a loud album. It's not an album that needs to be loud. But I want to say thank you to Dean, if you're still here, for not pushing that album any harder than it needed to be. You know, this is so often there are albums that didn't need to be loud but could be made loud, and so they were. And you know, it's again such a refreshing change to hear something mastered with space and depth, and an open feel to it. And yeah, it's just such a lovely album. So I hope that was interesting for you guys. We could revisit some of those examples perhaps later on if you would like to. Now we get to the bit where I announce the winner, and I want to talk a little bit briefly about how I came to the decision, because honestly, almost any of these I could happily have given the award to. I didn't give it to Bruno Mars because Uptown Funk and the Daft Punk album won. Have I got those two confused? No, I don't mean Daft Punk. What do I mean? Or maybe he hasn't won. Maybe I should have given it to Bruno. Well, anyway, I haven't given it to Bruno. Sorry, Bruno. I don't know whether you're watching, but and Gesaffelstein has won before. That album, I think, was mastered by Bob Ludwig back in the day rather than William, but didn't seem, you know, the whole idea is to draw attention to albums and artists that have been mastered with more dynamics. So repeating things, you know, Stephen Wilson could have won almost every year that the award has been running, but I think he's only won once as well. I would really have liked to give it, I mean, I'm a huge Brian Eno fan, everybody knows that. I would have loved to have given the award to Luminal, but I did feel, because it's such a mellow album, again, in terms of getting the message across, if somebody says, but it's a really quiet album, who cares if a quiet album is dynamic? We only make loud albums, and the whole point is, no, loud albums can be dynamic as well. So for that reason, not for that reason, but for all of these factors considered, and in the end, just because it was conceived from the outset with dynamics in mind, with a love and appreciation for dynamics and great sound and everything that goes along with it, this year I'm giving the Dynamic Range Day Award to Immersed by Justin Gray. I recommend everybody here listens to it, either in stereo or in Atmos if you have that capability, or both. As I say, if you check out the earlier live stream where I interviewed Justin, you will hear from talking to him just how much thought and passion and time he and everybody involved in that project have put into it. It was mastered by Michael Ramanowski from Coast Mastering in the US. It is just a fantastic album sonically from beginning to end. from the quietest to the loudest moments. It's a work of art and a very, very worthy winner. I hope you guys agree with that judgment. Feel free to let me know if you disagree. So there you go. That concludes the formal proceedings for this evening. I'm now going to scroll back and take a look through the chat and just see what everybody. Helena is clapping as well. Thank you so much for making such a fantastic sounding album, Helena. Thanks for being here. Dean, thanks for being here as well, and for your amazing work on the Eno album. It's just such a pleasure to be able to find these examples. You know, I always enjoy throughout the year. I'm kind of keeping an ear out, and a new album comes out by an artist I love, and I think, oh, hopefully, and so often it's disappointing. So to investigate something that I haven't heard before, or to hear something new by somebody I already know about, and to find that, yes, they have taken that opportunity of using those dynamics effectively, is just such a pleasure. So let me scroll back. There's lots of chat this evening. This is great to see you guys talking about all these issues. So yes, for anybody listening who wasn't there for this part of the conversation, definitely disable stable volume in YouTube if it's showing up for you. You should just be able to go. It's in a different place on mobile than it is on desktop. But if you're not sure, go to my website, productiondevice.co.uk, search for stable volume. I did a blog post talking about it and showing how to disable it. Might have done a video as well. So that's the early chat. We've seen all of that. Kev recommends my previous video. Thank you very much, Kev. Oh, I'm sorry. Brian's pointing out that the Dynamic Range Day logo or URL was covering which of the songs was in the bottom half of the display. My apologies. So some debate about whether people can hear the difference between the different versions or not. I do think it depends on the bass response, because the low end was the really big thing that I hear on those examples for Gorillaz. So that would be a thing to check, and also maybe just crank the level up a little bit, because as I say, they all got turned out quite a lot. Juan was talking about whether the options to enable and disable it could be to do with whether you're on mobile device or what region you're in. So this is lots of stable volume conversation. Brian says, people have learned more how not to make things loud. That education seems to be better communicated. Maybe that's a real change. I think you're talking about the current situation. You mean how to make things sound loud without high LUFS, or all the other stuff that goes into making things sound loud that is not LUFS? I definitely agree, Brian. Feel free to come back and say more if I've misunderstood you there. X-Radical, would you say that higher dynamic range only benefits very specific genres? There's no room for dynamic range in electronic dance music, for example. I completely disagree about that. Take a listen to the Gestaffelstein album, or the Justice album, or live stuff, or Underworld, or Orbital, or there's even a super dynamic Skrillex remix of something they did a few years ago. I get it. The problem with club music is DJs want loud mixes to make their life easier when they're mixing. It messes them up if they're choosing tracks on the fly and one of them is much lower in level. So I understand that pressure is there. But in terms of making it sound amazing, I can't accept that dance music doesn't also benefit from dynamics. So no, I would say balanced dynamics is a benefit for any genre. That's my opinion. And that's what I keep hearing over and over. I mean, there are definitely, like, I'm a huge fan of Fred again. And the USB album that he's been touring this year, you know, the majority of those songs are at -8. I'm not going to say that I have a massive problem with that. You know, they're incredibly well produced and polished and put together. They also have a lot of dynamic variety within them. So, you know, thank goodness they're not -6 or -4, which I think almost everything struggles to sound great that loud. So certainly some genres and need or benefit from dynamics less. I mean, I do think, immersed, if it had been mastered to be super crushed, would have really suffered in a way that potentially some other genres don't. But for me, every genre has the potential to benefit. That's my opinion and my experience. Kev, I know there's been a lot of remasters which have done as remasters in 2005 to 2015 that have been done again quieter from around 2018. That's interesting, and I would agree with that, but I can't. If you want to send me a list, Kev, I'd love to maybe investigate some of that, because that could be an interesting kind of thing to talk about potentially. Brian says some remasters have been atrocious. I agree. There are some terrible examples of remasters out there. There are also some fantastic examples of remasters. Super Agent AB. What about EDM tracks in Dolby Atmos? Okay. What was the example? Oh, Mike Hillier. I've got an Atmos playlist somewhere here that with some examples on. I mean, yeah, all genres, genuinely. EDM as well, I think. I mean, Justice is depends what you mean by EDM. Depends whether you mean the big label of EDM or if you're talking about, there are super focused specific genres. Bangarang by Skrillex. Maybe that could benefit from more dynamics, but I don't have a problem with it sounding the way that it does. But where's my Atmos playlist? Since you asked, here we go. Chase and Status, the Chase and Status album. I've got a track here, Don't Be Scared, off of that album, which is the album that's on. Go to album. It's on the album What Came Before. That sounds fantastic in Atmos. That was mastered by Mike Hillier at Metropolis. For example, the Gestafelschein album. I don't have many EDM examples in that playlist actually, but yeah, I think potentially, because just to take an example, so one of the characteristic sounds of EDM is that super slammed drum sound, right, where something is piling into a limiter, and you get, it kind of it stops a drum. An acoustic drum sound kind of goes boom. It's louder at the beginning and decays. You limit them hard and it goes boom. It's like runs all the way through. It's almost like a square block if you look at the waveform. If you want that sound in your EDM tune, one way to achieve it is to push everything up against the limiter, so the whole thing is heavily limited. The other way to do it is to put a limiter on the drum bus, excuse me, and apply that super pressure sound to the drums only, but then bring them down in the mix somewhat and allow more space for everything else, like, I don't know, vocals or string pads or percussion or whatever it might be that you want. I'm not saying you should do that necessarily, but I think you can do that, and lots of people don't do that, and I think that's a potentially missed opportunity. So Helena says yes, something like that, but I at this point can't remember what it was you were replying to. Sorry. Okay, probably intelligent techno. Maybe was my guess for the genre. Huanxi says probably the problem with remasters is not only aiming for a specific volume, but using processing techniques that weren't available in that specific era, so it messes up the sonic aesthetic. Could be, absolutely. Remastering is all mastering is, for me, a balancing act between arrogance and empathy. It's quite an arrogant thing to come in and say to somebody, well, it should sound like this, not like that. But if you do it with empathy, if you go in with an understanding of what they were trying to achieve musically, and everything you do tries to enhance that, rather than, I don't believe in mastering stamping a sound onto something. It's all about hearing what the intention was and taking that to its ultimate expression. That, for me, when you're working on vintage material, means not overcooking it. Not adding too much bass necessarily to something that was very lean back in the day. I remember when there were some Rolling Stones remasters that came out and everybody complained they were too bassy. I don't think I actually heard them to kind of form that opinion myself, but that's the kind of thing you have to be sensitive to. It's all a question of like, how did it sound originally? Have I moved it too far away or not? But yes, there's all kinds of stuff that can potentially go wrong in remastering, in particular because when you're when you're mastering, nobody has ever heard any previous version of it. When they hear your master, that's the first time they've ever heard it. That defines what their impression of that music is. So that's a position of great responsibility, but it also gives you a certain degree of creative freedom. When you're working with a remaster, that thing already exists in people's imaginations, in their hearts, in their minds. One of the, in my opinion, jobs of the mastering engineer is to preserve that intention, and to enhance it, not try and change it into something that it's not. Some discussion about the fact that Deadmau5 invested in an Atmos rig, but then went back. Brian says, Matt Colton masters very loud, but he's pretty great at it for its worth. I agree. I mean, he's, but I just, knowing that he appreciates great dynamics as much as the rest of us, I would love it if he were able to persuade more of his clients to go along with that. But like I say, I really understand the pressures that he's at working for those kind of artists in that kind of facility. More conversations about remasters. Looking for questions here. Somebody's asking, I don't know how you pronounce that username, whether there's any normalization on YouTube Live. Correct. YouTube only turns down loud stuff. But this is never going to get loud enough to trigger that. So this won't get normalized in that sense, but you could still have the stable volume feature on. You want to disable that if you want to hear those comparisons that I was doing most accurately. Wanchi says, if we can increase the whole stream output around 3 dB, that would be awesome. It's a bit low on headphones walking on the street. Appreciated, but tricky. In terms of having enough headroom to play dynamic material without clipping, right? If I've got something with 18 dB of headroom, I can't push that up and cause, or I don't want to push that up and cause clipping. And then I want to balance my vocal level against it. So I hear you, but it's a balancing act. So Kev is, I can see notifications of new comments. I'm getting there, guys. Some discussion about adding harmonics can involve making things sound louder without actually making them louder. That's very true. Controlled saturation, especially carefully tuned saturation, can be really invaluable. Which is what happens. Sound of Patrick says that what's happened when things are pushed very loud, you get distortion, which causes harmonics, which can increase the impression of loudness, but it's also achievable at lower LUFS levels. So this is an important thing for anybody who's kind of new to these topics. One of my big things is you can achieve, there's a big difference between high LUFS and something sounding loud. Helena and the Gesaffelstein example here sound super loud, even though the LUFS are not ridiculous. Those two things are separate, and we can have independent control of them. There's all kinds, distortion, saturation, density, stereo placement, arrangement, compression, limiting. All of this stuff contributes to the performance, contributes hugely to our perception of loudness, even when the LUFS is not that high. Loads of great conversation going on here. Thank you guys for answering lots of the questions for me. Brian thinks the award is well worth it for Justin. That's great to hear. Yeah, and Wunsch Machine, Max, is that your name? Saying there's a whole set of YouTube clips about each of the songs on Immersed, as far as I know. I think that is absolutely accurate, and I'd recommend you check it out. There's lots of great stuff. Justin, obviously, having won a Grammy for the album is has got lots of attention and has been very gracious in offering interviews to all kinds of people to talk about the album, as well as me earlier today. Kev talking about the trick of adding a synth to increase thickness. Nicholas looks like, no, you're not the only one who thinks the level of my voice is a little bit low, perhaps. Brian saying, yes, he means people have, there's a more sophisticated approach to loudness these days. I think that has definitely changed over the, back in the day when I started talking about dynamic range day, a lot of it was just about hammering a limiter. And now people are using much more varied and sophisticated strategies. People talking about Avicii loudness. Don't know that I've necessarily had a look at that. Kev saying, what you can do is place a soft clipper on each bus, having it take 2 to 3 dB off each, then on the master channel add another soft clipper and a limiter. I hated doing it, but it did get a loud mix. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, could be a whole possible topic for another live stream, but loudness, high LUFS is not that difficult. If you're prepared to put up with the compromises, because what you're saying there, Kev, is, soft clipping on almost every channel and then another one and then a limiter. And it's like, you can do that, but it will have a sound. It has there's no such thing as a free lunch. It frustrates me every time I see a new plug-in processor come through that claims to give you super high LUFS with no artifacts. There's always an artifact. It's, if you just compare a limiter and a clipper adds, it will dull the transients and it will hold things in. It will reduce the apparent punch and snap and clarity and depth if you use it hard, but it won't distort things, or it won't blatantly distort things. Whereas a clipper doesn't have the same effect on those things, but it does add blatant distortion. And it's all a question of, is that distortion appropriate for the material? Does it achieve an effect that is musically advantageous or beneficial, or at the very least not harmful, or not? Mastering is all about balancing these things to achieve the end result. But for me, once you start getting above about -10, it really becomes much more difficult to achieve these results cleanly and musically, which is important for me. And it keeps coming back to, for me, it's what the music needs that's more valuable rather than achieving a particular LUFS value. Extreme consequence processing. Yeah, more conversations about harmonics versus loudness and saturation. FabFilter Saturn is a great tool. If you guys are interested in a saturation tool, I really recommend Spectre by, I always forget the name of the company who do it. Let me find out for you. Waves Factory Spectre. I love it because it gives you, as Patrick's told me, yes, it's got an EQ-like interface. The thing I really like about it is the function, I forget what they call it. It's on the bottom right-hand side of the interface. You enable it, and it basically subtracts the EQ bit. So you can have the harmonics without the EQ, which is perfect for the way that I work, because I will always tune the EQ and the dynamics first, and then I get to the end and think, it needs a little bit more harmonic push. I can just add super subtle stuff in right at the end without dramatically changing all the other decisions I've made along the way. There's no need to apologize. Please don't apologize for being helpful. That would be ridiculous. That's interesting. The new Softube Voice plugin also operates on the same principle. I don't think I've come across that one. I need to check that out. And yes, exactly what you're saying, Patrick. All of these strategies enable us to give the excitement and the energy and the color that people like about harmonic saturation. And, don't get me wrong, distortion is a huge part of recorded music and has been ever since somebody first plugged an electric guitar into a cab, but it's all about musical distortion versus technical distortion. And I think one of the problems I have with the loudest was is that people end up just adding distortion for technical reasons rather than for musical reasons. But yes, tools like Spectre or Saturn or other kind of, well, for me as a mastering engineer, I want a ton of control when I'm doing this stuff. So I need to be able to fine tune this stuff. That's why I like Spectre so much, because I can choose exactly where to put it and exactly how much to have. And then, there's 8 different types of emulated saturation. So it gives me really fine grained control over that. But yeah, all of these things can be added without having to push the LUFS super high. So you can achieve the artistic result without having to make technical compromises. And X Radical says, yes, Newfangled Audio do make fantastic tools for mastering. They are a sponsor of my podcast. A question, Brian, not sure if this was ever asked, but what's one of the worst masters you've heard that were too loud? I mean, the one that, an obvious one would be Death Magnetic. Although, to be fair to it, back at the time when I was first, I don't know how much you guys know about the history, but I wrote about it on my old blog and it went viral. And it was one of the things that contributed to it being in the mainstream media. My colleague at the time, Simon Murphy, was a huge Metallica fan. He got hold of the Guitar Hero version of the audio, which wasn't massively distorted as the album was, and tried remastering it himself to get a result that he was happier with, and it came out at the end saying, I kind of understand why they did it, but it needed to generate some excitement somehow. It was very dry recording. It was very, there's lots of things that are interesting about that album sonically, which is not to take anything away from it musically. To get that kind of excitement, maybe it needed some of that. Did it need to be quite that loud? I think not, because they later released it at somewhat lower level. But to give slightly more interesting examples, the remasters of Soundgarden's albums from, 5-10 years ago, I don't know that they would sounded terrible. They were just hugely disappointing to me. They were like Super Unknown, I think it is. The original album sounds incredible. And the remasters just went in completely the wrong direction for me, in my opinion. They went much louder than necessary. It negatively impacted the punch, the thump, the space, the depth, all of that stuff. I don't think they were distorted necessarily, but and the EQ balance, I didn't feel they kind of made them bigger and warmer, which is not necessarily a problem, but they ended up sounding a bit thick and dull and muddy to me. So I didn't love those. I'm going to stop that. I don't like calling things out and being negative. I like being positive about stuff that I do like the sound of. Sorry. Patrick, if you would use a compressor to create distortion and then an expander with the opposite settings being triggered from the same parallel signal as the compressor before it in the series, this would recreate the original dynamics before the compressor, but would it keep the distortion? Yes, I think so. But, well, I'm not 100% sure, because you can undistort saturated audio with the right parameters, not if it's completely clipped, but depending on the degree of saturation, because it's all about the transfer curve, you can have an inverse transfer curve that kind of restores it. So if you separate out the distortion element from the gain management, the compression element, I think possibly you could untangle those two. I'm not 100% sure what the benefit is. For me, I mean, this is just me. I really like the TC Electronic MD4 mastering processor because lots of reasons, but one of the reasons is in the limiter section, it starts off with 0 clipping and you can wind the clipping in. Whereas if you take something like the Fab Filter, it's a lot less easy to untangle how much clipping is happening and have explicit control of it. I'm a control freak. I like to be able to say, yes, I want to use some soft clipping, or no, I don't. or yes, I want to use some hard clipping somewhere else in the chain, or I don't. So for me, having my compression separate from my saturation, I prefer that. It's like, I mean, in a mastering context, if you're doing creative stuff in the mix or in the arrangement, having a compressor that saturates in a nice way, that's all just part of the sound and part of the play that goes into finding the sounds that make it up. But for me, when it gets to mastering stage, I want, clipping is different from compression, is different from saturation, somewhat is different from limiting. All of these things I like to have distinct, and I like to be able to bypass each one of them and just hear the exact contribution of that to the sound. So I think what you're saying might be possible, Patrick, but for me, not particularly appealing. But that's just my opinion. Brian says you can untangle things a bit with spectral layers because you can potentially remove negative interactions between instruments. I need to find a way to play with spectral layers and see what's happening. Just bear with me, guys. I'm going to see how many... my voice is starting to go. It's been a long day. I think the number of people watching is dropping off at this point. I'm seeing the number of questions slowing down, so I think I'm going to round it up at this point. Patrick, interested in keeping the distortion but keeping the dynamic range? Yeah, absolutely. But so for me, don't compress it. Just add some distortion. I mean, it depends whether you've got, if the exact type of distortion you're looking for isn't available in the saturator or whatever processor you've got, then maybe that's the only way to do it. It would certainly be an interesting experiment. But I mean, again, I usually find... So for me, it's all about how much and where the harmonics are is the really crucial thing. In something like Spectre, yes, you've got 7-8 different types of saturation you can choose between. Often those make a much less of a difference than where the EQ, where in the EQ spectrum you place it. But again, none of this. There are no right or wrong answers except serve the music. I'm seeing people saying thanks for all you do. My pleasure. Kev says it's been a great day. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's difficult to judge from here. I can see some shares, I can see some comments, but it's always great to talk to you guys directly on the stream. Thank you for being here and supporting the event. Brian says thanks for all the heavy lifting. Glad to see you still presenting all of this. Well, I said to my son, yeah, this is the 16th year. He was like, wait, what? Part of me feels like I'm not having any impact at all, but I think I'm contributing to it. So Kev says, please keep uploading the videos where you listen to various mixes. Those are difficult to come by. Or do you mean just kind of like I did today with the Gorillas, the contrast between the Atmos? I mean, that's the great thing about having that Atmos trick available, is getting hold of genuine, very close comparisons between dynamic and less dynamic things has always historically been really hard. And the nice thing about having those Atmos versions available is it makes things a lot easier. So I'm certainly going to keep doing those. Brian says the Hey Jude conversation will be fun. Okay, you were listening to the earlier stream, Brian. Yes, I'm going to keep out for that. Oh, and don't forget the t-shirt. Yeah, I have to look out the design for this and get it uploaded. If anybody has I think I used Spreadshirt to get this done back in the day. I don't even know if that's still a thing. If somebody has a favorite t-shirt manufacturer, let me know. Wunsch Machine, maybe a short question about the DID26 code. Where do you put it? Tried it on the courses, but there was only the PayPal button. Let me just try it now and double check it's working. Homemastering.com. Oh, I said I was going to post the links for those, didn't you? I'll do that. I'll check both of these. So HMEQ, this is Home Mastering EQ. Let me copy that and paste it into the chat for you. Kev says I got so much from the one and the two mixes from years apart. I agree, but that's really rare. Maybe there's another song on that album that I could do something similar for, that to kind of make some other... I think there were similar points for each of the songs, to be honest. Let's just check that this code is working. So if you scroll down, click the Unlock Your Instinct for EQ button, it takes you through. Yeah, so on the payment page where the PayPal button is, right underneath the price, you can enter the coupon code DRD26, apply, and that adds the discount. That's for the courses. For the plugin, the discount is already added. Let me know if you're seeing that, if that's working for you. And let me just find that other link. homemastering.com HMC. So it's just for these 2 courses. That's the other thing. I'm pretty sure it's max. Forgive me if it's not. Let me paste that in. Patrick says, thank you for doing this. You're welcome. It's my pleasure. That has pasted the link in. Let me double check that the discount for that one is working as well. Scroll down. Conquer compression. DRD26. Apply. Yeah. Yep, should all be working. But if anybody gets stuck, drop me an email. We'll figure out what's going on and I'll get it sorted out for you. Juan Chi says, let's have some online tea. A cup of tea, you mean? Or food? Have I listened to Joaquina? I have not. By all means, send me a link. Oh, there's a title. I can copy. Actually, I can't copy and paste that, but it's okay. The comments will be there. I'll come back and look at them. So there you go. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Thank you for your support. Please listen to the music on the shortlist this year and enjoy. I look forward to seeing you all for the next one, and I will keep doing videos where I compare dynamic with less dynamic things for you guys to listen to and share with everybody else. So please keep spreading the word. Please share these live streams and the memes and all the other dynamic range day stuff if you would like, if you think you know other people who would be interested. And as always, thanks for listening.